Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. I think we'll still have a few more attendees join us, but I know we have a really wonderful discussion prepared for you today, so we're going to go ahead and get started. But welcome everyone to Exploring Ethics and Artificial Intelligence in the Workplace. This is part of our webinar series, Ethics and the Future of Work. And this series is presented to you by the Center for Health, Work and Environment and the Center for Bioethics and Humanities, both at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. We're so excited that you all have decided to spend your afternoon here with us. We have a wonderful group of panelists, as you can see here, and I know that they're really excited to share their thoughts with you and get into this wonderful discussion. So before we begin that, we're going to go ahead and we will go over a few technical logistics for the webinar so that you kind of know what you're walking into today, and then we'll dive into the discussion. So as you might have seen, this is a webinar format meeting. So that means that all participants are kept on mute throughout the duration of our presentation. However, if you would like to chat with our panelists or like to engage in conversation with other attendees, please use the chat function specifically for any of your technical issues or a conversation with other attendees. We really encourage you to use the Q&A box to chat with our panelists and ask specific questions to our panelists. We'll be using this Q&A box throughout the duration of the webinar to answer your questions and intertwine those questions within our conversation. So please try to be mindful of those two different functions. You are more than welcome to turn on closed captioning. That is in the control panel of your screen on the webinar. And for those of you who are here and would like to provide some feedback about our webinar series at the end, there will be a survey at the end of the webinar. This survey will also allow you to claim continuing education credit for any of you who would like to claim that credit today. And again, that survey will be available at the end of the webinar and in the follow-up email from this webinar. This webinar is also being recorded so that you are able to view it on YouTube afterwards or share it with any of your colleagues or friends. So that link for the recording will be available also in that follow-up email. So super important, keep an eye on your inbox after today's webinar. If you have any other chat questions or technical logistics questions, my colleague and I will be in the chat answering any of your questions. But without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our moderator for this afternoon, Dr. Lee Newman.
Great, thank you so much, Madison, and thanks for being here. You all, we had a prep call on Monday just to get ready for you today, and I had to tell you, I had trouble sleeping after that because I was so excited about what we'd be doing today. So, Madison, thank you for organizing us, and a shout out to our colleagues at the Center for Bioethics and Humanities who bringing together ethics and our interest in the health, safety, and well-being of workers has been a great learning experience. I'm Lee Newman. I'm a distinguished professor at the University of Colorado, and I direct one of the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health Centers of Excellence in total worker health, and also one of the education and research centers. I want to introduce quickly our panelists today, and I promise you a fascinating discussion. Let me start by introducing to you each of them very briefly. You can read their bios on the website. We have Dr. Husheng Darabi, who is a professor and co-director of the Occupational Safety Program at the Great Lakes Center for Occupational Health and Safety, and who you'll hear, very interestingly, has developed probably the first course for occupational safety and health professionals and AI professionals to get together and learn from each other. We have Dr. Melissa Hendel, who is the Chief Research Informatics Officer for the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus, doing really intriguing work in working with AI and clinical data, and we'll hear more from her about that. And as always, the person who needs no introduction to our group is Dr. John Howard. Dr. Howard is director of the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, which, as you may know, is part of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the Department of Health and Human Services, and who really opened my eyes a number of years ago when he started really forecasting for us the importance of machine learning and learning algorithms and artificial intelligence and its potential impacts for workers. And with that, welcome panelists. The format today for everyone to know is I've asked each of the panelists, starting with Dr. Howard, is going to give us a little bit of an AI 101. So we're all know we're talking about the same thing. But then each of them is going to talk a little bit about what is front of mind for them around the issues of ethics and the workplace as impacted by artificial intelligence. So Dr. Howard, let me turn it over to you. Welcome.
Oh, well, thanks, Lee. Let me just check the audio, make sure that you can hear me okay. Great. Thanks, thumbs up. So I wanted to start us off with a little primer on ethics, because this is ethics and AI in the future of work. And sometimes, we don't have a total grasp of ethics. And I wanted to start out with a very simple definition. The one that I use is basically ethics are principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. And certainly AI is a gigantic area of activity. And you can look in a lot of different sources, government sources, industry sources, academia, consultancies. They have all sorts of different principles, ethical principles that they put forward. And if you look at all those and you look at the literature, they often converge mostly on a set of principles. Sometimes they diverge a little, but mostly they converge. And the set of principles that I start with are from the National Institute for Standards and Technology in the United States, called NIST. It's a sub-level of the Department of Commerce. And they talk about trustworthy AI. So what kind of principles do they use? And there are 7 of them that they use. The first principle is valid and reliable. And that's really where, when you deploy an AI system, it really is accurate. It's reliable. It's trustworthy. It doesn't do things beyond the training set that created it, so to speak. The second principle that NIST talks about is safe. The AI systems basically have to do what they say, and without endangering the life, health, property, environment, whatever that AI systems is supposed to do. Their design should be responsible, their development, deployment, all their practices should be responsible and safe. The third is secure and resilient. And here, they're kind of related together, but basically resilience is the ability to return to a normal function after an unexpected adverse event. We all know that with any system. And so that resilience relates to the robustness of the system. Does it work well when it's stressed? The fourth area is accountable and transparent. And here we're going to talk a lot about this issue about an AI system having the ethical principle of accountable and transparent. It reflects essentially the system, and its outputs have to be available to the people that are interacting with it. So if you're in the workplace and you are trying to find out whether your system is accountable and transparent, you have to be able to understand it. And that gets to the next issue, which is an ethical issue in AI: explainable and interpretable. Explainability refers to the representation of the mechanisms that underlie the AI system, the algorithm. How interpretable is it? Is the meaning of that AI system's output? Does it resonate with the individual, with the worker? And another one, almost to the end here, the sixth one, is privacy enhanced. And this is a big one. And this is where you go to the literature, whatever AI system, whatever ethical system we're talking about, this is the big one. Privacy essentially means that the practices that the AI system produces, it safeguards the human autonomy, the identity, the dignity of the individual. very important issue. As you know, in many algorithmic management systems that are used in the workplace, privacy is one of the big issues. How much is my data going out there beyond my control? And the last issue that NIST brings up is fair with harmful bias managed. And here is another big area that we all know about. The idea that the AI system could be biased, harmfully biased, discriminatory. And we've all seen many years ago the issue with recruitment and hiring practices at Amazon. So these 7 are extremely important and very common ethical principles. And one of the things that I think is easiest to remember about these principles is an article that was written by Floridi and Cowles in the UK in 2022 called The United Framework of 5 Principles for AI in Society in General. And the reason I bring them up is because one of our sponsors is the Center for Bioethics and Humanities. And it basically utilizes the medical or the bioethics principles, the basic principles: beneficence, do only good, obviously responsible, well-being, good, common good, benefit of the worker, etc. Non-malfeasance, the second principle: do no harm. Make sure the system is safe, secure, it's respectful, it's privacy protected. Its misuses are prevented. The third is autonomy, the power to decide on your own, the decision to delegate if you need to. Again, privacy here being an important issue. The fourth bioethical principle is justice, essentially promoting prosperity, avoiding unfairness, eliminating discrimination, fairness, equitable. All the ethical principles can go under justice too. And the one that's added by these authors is the one that we talked about in terms of interpretability, explainability. Here, the authors add a 5th bioethical principle, if you will: explicability, explainability. In other words, how does it work? Does the individual who is subject to the AI in the workplace, do they know how it works? And how accountable is it? Who is responsible for the way it works? So that's the general sort of ethical principles that apply to AI. And I think they're the basis of the rest of our discussion today. So back to you, Lee.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. And by the way, we decided we're not PowerPointing people today. We're going to be having a conversation. So, John, thank you for laying that out in such a clear format. If it's okay with the other folks on the panel, I'd like to jump to our poll question because it derives straight from what you were just saying, Dr. Howard. And I'm wondering if we can go ahead and pull up the poll for people to respond to. And so this is a chance for all of you to give us a quick shot at the ethical concerns that you feel. What is your top ethical concern about the use of AI algorithms in the workplace? And we've given you 4 choices. We could have had a longer list, but lack of transparency, violation of privacy, job displacement by AI, hidden bias and discrimination. So if you would, folks, take a moment and choose one of those, and we'll pull up the poll and kind of check the temperature of our audience here. And Madison, I'll leave this to you. So responses should be coming in. Madison, how are we doing?
Good. It looks like we have about 77% of our participants who have responded. So go ahead and get your responses in, and we'll do another 10 seconds. We'll share the results.
I'm excited to see the response.
All right, everyone.
Well, you're pretty evenly distributed, I'd say. I'm not going to put a statistic on it, but 28% concerned. Number one is lack of transparency, 20% violation of privacy, 20% job displacement, and a third hidden bias and discrimination. So the good news is I think we're going to be talking about all of those today. So thank you for the poll. Let me go ahead and turn this over next to Dr. Hendel, and if you would tell us a little bit about maybe a little bit about your work and also what's front of mind in this conversation.
Thanks very much, Dr. Newman. It's really a great pleasure to be here to speak with you all. As was mentioned earlier, I'm the Chief Research Informatics Officer here at the University of Colorado Anschutz. And in my role here, I'm responsible for helping support clinical data architectures for research purposes. In particular, we've been doing a lot of work recently trying to understand how do we best take advantage of these new technologies that have recently become all the rage. In my research side, however, I've been doing what folks refer to as good old-fashioned AI for many years, which is essentially a lot of systems that help us classify data in different ways using computational inference to infer new knowledge from existing knowledge. And we've applied this in a variety of different contexts, but specifically have had great success in using these approaches for rare disease diagnostics using model organism and other basic research data. And so our sort of, great insights are that we can actually use a very large diversity of different data sources to infer new knowledge and hopefully help realize public benefit, in this case, diagnosing rare disease patients. And so there's some absolutely beautiful stories of, saving lives that can be realized by these different types of AI technologies. But with that comes great responsibility, of course, which is why we're here today. And I think, one of the concerns that we have with these, especially new technologies relating to the large language models, such as in use by ChatGPT, as the most famous example, are that they have a tendency to learn based on the content that is put into them and the content that's already out there on the web in particular. So all those good old-fashioned AI tools and resources that we develop, well, they're all in there too. And so it's a little bit like learning from content that is looking under the streetlight. So we often say in basic research, we study the same genes over and over again. We study the same diseases over and over again because they're the ones that we can see or understand more readily. And the same kinds of biases can be realized in the context of these new large language models because they too are basing their knowledge inference on what we already know. And so one of my deep concerns is that as these technologies become more commonplace, that we're not taking that into account. Now, in the context of the clinical usage that I was speaking about earlier, there's a clinician human that's involved in interpreting those results before they're ever used, right? So we don't ever fully rely on those kinds of things. And so a good example of that might be like matching a patient to a clinical trial. The clinician would review whether or not that patient is actually appropriate for that trial, for example. So I think what everyone's really concerned about are the cases where we know we can't afford, or it's not the right context, where there isn't a human involved in that usage. And that's, I think, a big issue for some of the occupational issues that we're going to talk about today. So I'll pause there.
No, I really appreciate that. You touched on some important things here, including what happens when we give our AI tools more autonomy. Right now, you have a really terrific example of it augmenting your human capabilities, right? But I think we'll talk more about what happens when we give it more decision-making latitude. Dr. Darabi, I was absolutely blown away when I heard about the course that you developed, but go ahead and tell us what's front of mind and tell us a little bit about what you've been up to.
Sure, thank you, Dr. Newman. So happy to be here. Let me start with that course a little bit. And there is a link we can send you, which has like kind of the course contents to a summary of them, but a detailed link we can definitely share with the audience later. So the course we developed is for occupational health and safety experts to learn about AI. That's the course. So the course is basically teaching AI with that assumption that the audience are occupational safety and health professionals. So one concept that definitely we, after offering this course for 2 times, and every time we offer it is 3 to 4 weeks, there is no doubt in my mind that the best AI projects in OSH, occupational safety and health, are those that are developed using a team of OSH experts and AI experts. Of course, there are other roles such as management. Management should have contribution in every team. At least they pay the money. We know that. And also the workers. They should be a part of the team. But these 2 members, the occupational safety and health and AI experts that usually are computer science, people who are savvy in coding and developing AI algorithms. When we put these 2 together, the whole game changes. And that's basically the main target of our course. And one thing I want to add, of course, we can talk about that more if audience have questions, but when OSH experts and professionals contribute in that AI development, a lot of ethical issues actually will be addressed. The fact is that when an AI model makes a wrong prediction, and because of that, a worker could die, there is no way for a computer science expert in AI to see that. No way that a computer science person could look at the output predicted by an AI model and say, this does not seem to be right. But when an OSH expert looks at that case and looks at the case that, AI should stop this robot because a worker is in the vicinity of that robot, but the AI model says, oh, no problem, robot can still continue the work. An OSH expert might flag that and say, this is wrong. This cannot happen. And that I would say it's an ethical issue, because you are basically putting an algorithm in a system and trusting it, but that same algorithm could kill a worker. So we would go and say, when we put these 2 groups together, we might be able to prevent a lot of those issues that one of them by themselves cannot prevent. So I'm going to stop here, and of course, depending on the questions, I would be happy to explain more about these concepts.
Thanks, Dr. Rabi. I think that one of the things that drawing on what Dr. Howard was saying earlier when he presented the list from NIST that you touched on is this issue of interpretability. And it sounds like you're putting the onus, the responsibility for interpreting on occupational safety and health professionals, because you think the people who are creating the AI tools can't possibly do that. I wonder if we all agree that we can really give them a pass on that or not. But Dr. Howard, let me flip this back to you. You've now heard some interesting things. What are you thinking?
Right. Yeah, I really want to point out a couple things about Dr. Darabi's experiment here. First of all, ethics in general and applied ethics specifically, and when we're doing an applied ethics framework for AI, there's nothing enforceable about those normative principles. And normative here meaning norms, rules. You can come up with all sorts of ethical rules and guidelines, but they're not self-enforceable. And the issue then, when you move from principles to practice, is how do you ensure that the practice of AI, especially in a workplace, is principled, is ethical? And the only way that that I think it can be done is the model that Dr. Jarabi is doing in this classroom situation, which a lot of authors call the socio-technical approach, which is you take on the social side, and here we're talking about the workplace as our sociology, and then you pair it with the technical side, the developing side, the people who write these algorithms, coders, et cetera. And you bring those two communities together with a sensitivity to risk, an awareness of the context of the technology in the workplace. How is it used? Who's using it? And a respect for how work is done and the nature of injury profiles in the workplace. And then a commitment on the part of the developer to only produce what we consider, based on all of our principles, to be ethical AI. And I think that classroom experience that Dr. Jarabi is doing here is an example of the model that a lot of authors think may be the solution. Because when developers come together with appliers, then you get a better understanding of how the ethical issues of AI are moving from principle to practice. So I think it's a little, what he's doing there in Illinois, there in the classroom, is a little tiny model of what most authors say is the way we need to do it. It's kind of like a complex interaction over the principles or the virtues, but how do you design them into systems, into AI systems?
You know, Dr. Howard, it sounds great. Meta announced that it's about to throw open its code for its AI tools. You know, OpenAI has put the tools out there. You've now got thousands of versions of AI tools that, you know, some of which are purported to be more trained in moral principles than others. How are we going to channel that into the ones that, say, an employer uses in a particular workplace? You know, how do we actually get to the ones that are going to work for us and the ones that won't?
Yeah, I think that's the big question. And that's the issue about how you go from ethical principles to actual practice. And, you know, there's a number of authors out there that talk about in societal AI in general. One of the big principles I'll mention a couple, but the one that always struck me as very important is incremental deployment. The idea that you don't want an employer to say, okay, well, we're going to buy this thing and it's coming into the workplace, boom, boom, we're done. Rather, you do it like any other kind of technology that you would adopt in the workplace. You would bring it in, you test it out, you would pilot it. It would be an incremental analysis. So I think that is a very important principle in terms of how we do the practice of ethical AI. So that would be number one. The other factor I think is extremely important is that you're building it with the folks that either have to operate it or who are subject to it or could be injured by it. You know, we use that principle in all sorts of workplace technologies. We emphasize labor management relations, all of those kinds of things. I think AI development, whether it's an algorithm or a device that's robotic, I think it's the same principle. You bring that together with the folks that are going to have to operate it or are subject to it, and you get them to look at it, and there's where the transparency comes in. They have to be able to see what's inside of it. How is it working? They have to understand it too. So I think those are some of the practices I think that we could probably put in a template and say, here's probably how you do it.
I think one of the biggest challenges here, though, is in this sort of explainability space and transparency space,
Yes,
which, you know, I think we can all agree is, you know, a really great value to have. And, when our algorithms were simple and our data sets were small, these were things that were really quite realizable, even from a layperson perspective. But one of the big challenges now is that, and it's not just about AI, it's about any kind of technology that's leveraging very large data sets and very many of them. There's no mortal that can actually sift through all those things to really deeply understand, all of the variables and factors, and that is in fact the purpose of the AI technology in the first place. So how do we distill what the AI technology is doing, recognizing that humans are not going to be able to look at every line of code, every data point, and actually have that level of transparency? And I think it comes down to a fit for purpose, just like any other technology. What exactly are we trying to achieve? How will we know it's working? How will we know it's not working? What is the standard by which we decide it's working, and who gets to decide? And that's where I think, there's this tension between the, sort of high level of transparency that we can say, like, well, which data sets were used to train the models, or but then on the other end, how are we actually using that information to make decisions, and who's making those decisions based on that?
Yeah, I would agree with you like 200%. And the examples that I would use, one, a lot of algorithms are proprietary, so you really can't get inside of them because the developer doesn't have that kind of transparency. So clearly that's a problem. Do you want to buy that kind of algorithm? Is that the kind of algorithm you want to introduce into your workplace? Or do you want to go to the developer and say, look, I need some transparency there. I need to understand what's going on. Then even beyond that, some of these new these advanced machine learning algorithms using deep learning, et cetera, they may be changing their internal logic based on the inputs. And sometimes it's really hard to keep up with some of those types of changes. So those are examples, I think, of what you're talking about, Melissa, is that the explicability, the interpretability, the transparency is a real issue. But it may not be impossible. So let's say you get an algorithm which you really can't get into. Well, you could feed it some data and see what the output is. Does it express bias? Is the manipulation of the predictors that the algorithm does, is it not something that you really want to see? You've got to be able to falsify the algorithmic outputs by testing. And that's why I keep coming back to this incremental deployment kind of thing, which I think is the number one issue when it comes to putting something in the workplace. So I agree with you 200%. It's a real hill to climb, but it may not be impossible. There may be some ways to do it, even with the most proprietary algorithm.
Dr. Jarabi, this has probably come up for you in your course. I'm wondering if you have a thought about it.
Yeah, definitely. So I would kind of classify, kind of AI issues to two different classes. One would be like the general kind of algorithms where, for example, ChatGPT that is already out there. I'm sure, the audience, many of them have already used it. That's like a very universal platform. Everybody can go there and ask for anything. And, or like autonomous cars, like when you buy an autonomous car, those have been designed for a universal use that anybody can drive them. We don't know the user, we don't know the platform, we don't know the environment. So they are supposed to work in any environment most of the time. So when it comes to those situations, when we talk about like a universal use and general model, there are lots of concerns, but unfortunately, OSH experts or individuals don't have a big role to play because it is so hard to modify that system unless the vendors come in and try to change the universal system. So that's why, when we offer, when we offer the course, we have students who ask me, for example, whether you trust a car to drive itself. Will you sit in that car? And my personal answer is no, because the same me, I can actually find a way to manipulate that car. It's very easy. very easy to actually provide some sort of input that the same car could crash. So I would not trust it because I know how to do it. And we are very far from the point that we can trust these systems. Very, very far. However, going back to the other thing, which is actually should be the Osh concern, these are dedicated special systems. Like when you are, like let's say you have a construction site where worker safety is high priority. So you know the site, you know your workers, you know the type of problems that they might face, safety issues, all those things are there. Now, how do we come up with an AI solution for that specific problem, for those specific workers? If we narrow down the domain and say, this is our system, then you can actually come up with a very good AI system, which can be trusted, it can be tuned, it can be calibrated for your application. And that is where we want the Osh experts to come in and identify what is expected exactly from that specific system. Would I develop an AI product and say all construction sites in the whole US can use this product right away? I would not do that. Because as soon as you generalize that thing, a lot of issues might happen versus dedicated solutions. At least we are not there now. I mean, we can easily find the performance of AI solutions that are developed for general Osh environments to be very low. And you can find a lot of issues versus when you have a dedicated problem, which you know your environment, you know the domain, you know everything. It's just you need a solution for that.
Yeah.
So I would say that would be probably the best way to go for now, which could also address ethical issues. A lot of them.
Yeah, I think Dr. Darabi, that also speaks very much to one of the questions in the Q&A from Bernard Fontaine, touching on that. So in that kind of situation, but let me just poke out a little bit.
I just wanted to offer one thing, because I think, you know, Dr. Rabi's example of the car and the trust, you know, is it a trustworthy car? You know, that gets to the issue of what we're talking about here. Is it a trustworthy AI system that I'm going to buy and stuff? And I think, you know, he really pointed out an important issue here that's on my list of things that an employer should be checking against. And that's asking the question, what kind of safeguards against the manipulation of the system is in your system? What kind of safeguards did you build into your system? They say, no, we don't have any of that. And it's Dr. Darabi's car that he can somehow manipulate. Okay, fine. Then that's a clear line of demarcation between what is safe and what is unsafe. And that's where you take an ethical principle and you say, look, without those safeguards, this thing could harm people. So therefore, I'm rejecting it. So I think that example is extremely important, and that example of a safeguard against manipulation of the device or the system itself, we need to put on our list of important issues for employers and workers to pay close attention to.
Well, Dr. Harrod, you've reminded me of an even earlier mechanical example, which was the invention of the elevator. and when elevators were first invented, and some of us are actually old enough to remember when to ride an elevator, you felt safe because there was a person who had a job, and their job was to be an elevator operator. And they operated a crank. I didn't exactly know how it worked, but they could get me to the right floor if I asked them to. Then they started having buttons for each floor, and the elevator operator was still there. That man or woman was there, often wearing gloves, and they would, I'd say, third floor, and they would press the button for me on the third floor. We then took them out of the equation, and we started writing elevators where the safety feature that was added, there were at least two. One was a telephone, so that if I got stuck, I could call somebody, or I thought I could. And the second was the big red button, the alarm button. And it turned out those were innovations that flipped people from thinking that a non-manually operated elevator was unsafe to saying, okay, I'll get on this without somebody driving it. So, so I feel like we're in sort of the red emergency button phase of AI from what you said.
Yeah.
But Dr. Hendel, something that you said earlier, you've used it maybe in a more generative sense, maybe the general example that Dr. Darabi described, to discover new things. So, if we limit ourselves to saying, well, we know the hazards, we now want to use AI as as an augmentation of our human capabilities in a known setting in the workplace, are we missing out? Aren't there opportunities to discover new hazards or new ways of preventing hazards, just like you've made new observations about rare diseases?
Absolutely. And I think, maybe one of the things that, when we think about just in data science in general is that we teach our students, always know where your data came from, right? So there was a story several years ago where there were some omics data analyses happening, and it turns out that the data was quite biased because the caregivers for the mice in the experiment were wearing perfume. Now, that's not something that's tracked, in the lab notebook, right? But it was revealed because of patterns that were found in comparing data sets, large data sets across sources, right? And so these are the kinds of things that can potentially be revealed by leveraging these types of technologies and the massive amounts of data that they're able to sift through to find patterns, to find potential new hazards or new safety measures that should be implemented in ways that we would human wouldn't necessarily be able to reveal. And so it still comes back to, where did your data come from, and really understanding the size and complexity of all these data sources at some high level, but just using it for that purpose. But then that still comes back to either an incremental approach where we know what kinds of evaluation we're going to do, or there's a human involved in interpreting those results, right? So let's say we do find a new, hazard that's revealed by this process. Well, how do we validate that hazard really exists? We're obviously not going to, it would be unethical to wait for it to happen, right? So I think that's where the challenge really lays, is like, how do we weigh the consequences of doing something with not doing something, and when we do find such things?
Go ahead, Dr. Howard.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, because when you were teeing up that question, I was thinking of sort of the affirmative side of what some of these AI systems, machine learning systems, offer us in the workplace. And the one example that I always think is probably most applicable and certainly most needed is to look at data sets that may exist in a particular workplace, a large firm or a multinational, for instance, with a lot of data, but even a small firm with sensor data inputs, et cetera, on a 24/7 basis could have quite a bit of data, coupling that with human activity in terms of accident records or near misses or injuries. MSD injuries, et cetera. The idea of that being a type of ChatGPT-4 training data set that then could be trained using one of these newer, more advanced machine learning algorithms to be able to generate more knowledge, more information about how to prevent a particular injury, illness within the workplace. The idea of using a large data set like the IMUS data that OSHA collects for accidents or compliance investigations that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has in terms of their survey, or other large survey data sets that are related to workplace injury and illness, for trying to predict how we prevent things. I think that's a real positive here in the AI field, that given all of these ethical principles and practices that we want to also use ourselves, we become developers. In other words, we are occupational safety and health machine learning developers. So I think that's another very exciting area in occupational safety and health.
Can I also comment on that? That's definitely very, very important. Having kind of universal data sets that are aggregated from different sources. We actually do have that in medicine. There are like cancer data sets that different hospitals contribute to those. And when a model is developed on that data set, that's a very strong AI model because it is using variety of data under different conditions and a large number of data sets. So in one of, I think it was in 2021, we published actually a paper and exactly this problem that these universal sets and benchmarks exist in other fields, such as medicine, such as game industry, but they do not exist in OSH. We actually outlined that in that paper and said, we invite people to create these data sets because the only way to check general universal models in OSH is through these data sets. There is no other way. We need to have that base. Then people can start using them and create them. And I think, that's definitely a great point, and it should be done. Sooner or later, it should be done.
Just to build on that and pivot slightly towards the privacy issue. People are fairly obsessed about data privacy and rightfully so, our personal health information as one part of that. I'm sure there are corporations that would prefer not to have all of their data shared into a broader data set for reasons of whatever they may think is the value of their data. Do you feel like we're in a position yet to every time I put something into ChatGPT, it's sucking that information in and it's doing something else with it that I don't control. Doctors in training, residents are now being reminded, do not use AI algorithms to put patient data in to try to solve for their mystery illness. Where do you think we sit now in terms of this privacy of data side of AI? Now that you're talking about, let's share it so we can explore.
One of the things that I was thinking of while you were talking about that, which is, I think, is related to that, is data now is being considered to be a business asset. And so there's an interesting sort of converse of an individual trying to protect their own individual data. And that's all the voluminous privacy literature that's associated with AI. But on the other hand, there are collectors of data, whether they be employers or others, who view that data collection as an asset and how they can use it. There are companies that do that kind of business where they are in the business of selling data sets that are assembled from many different sources. I think we've been talking about these large language models a lot, which are really super limited to the very largest company. OpenAI at Microsoft spent supposedly $10 billion on developing ChatGPT. So some of that stuff is totally outside the reality of where most people are at in terms of a workplace setting. So I think some of that we need to segment the market, so to speak, and say, well, there's always going to be, and Google's developing their own large language model, and the companies are now going to compete against each other. And they're basically, their training data set is like everything in the intranet, including all the books and all that. I think we want to figure out, in terms of occupational safety and health, where is our data set? What is a good data set that we can use to figure out more specific injury and illness preventers? That's I think Dr. Arabi got into that issue in that paper that he wrote that he referred to, is how do we start doing that? How do we structure that? Do we create a sort of knowledge collective where companies can bring that data, that asset that they have? Can a government agency like BLS be the repository for that? And then can we all use it to generate better knowledge? I think that's the real positive side of AI in terms of workplace data. And then we could apply all of these ethical principles that we've been talking about to ensure that that data set, that training data set, was not discriminatory, was not biased, protected privacy. We could apply that. And I think that's what NIST is trying to get to with their basic framework, is they're trying to get us to that point, nudging us a bit along. But gee, you know, we're just at the beginning of this journey.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, and I want to remind people that the Q&A is open, so we encourage people to add there. I'm tracking at the same time some of the comments in there, and Bernard has I think said some things that are quite compatible with that, including something which Dr. Howard, you know, your team at NIOSH has been very focused on, which is how do we in fact anticipate what the future of work will mean for workers? You know, what do we understand about the workforce? What do we understand about the workforce of the future? Do you think that net that these tools are going to help us in being able to answer that question about what lies ahead for workers, and maybe be in at a new level of prevention than we are now?
Well, certainly we hope so. You know, I think what's going to happen in the future, I'm not 100% sure about, but these tools are all coming online, and I think our responsibility is to figure out how useful are they, and in which uses will they produce the greatest outcome for us in safety and health. You know, Dr. Rabi talked about the medical side, and Melissa certainly is very involved in that. Well, I read two papers recently that Eric Topol called my attention to. One paper looks at chest X-rays and can tell whether somebody has diabetes. Well, who would have ever thought, looking at a chest X-ray? But you know, the sensitivity was about 80%, the specificity was 70, somewhere around there. But that only gets better the more, you know, the more chest X-rays you put into your data set and stuff. The same thing, another paper looked at chest X-rays and were able to get hemodynamic data from the heart about that instead of doing a catheterization. So, you know, I think the future is entirely open to what you can do with data, this important asset that we didn't, you know, we did surveillance, but we never, these new tools are giving us a lot of interesting ways to look at that data. And I think these tools, these machine learning tools, these algorithms, we're just at the beginning of figuring out, well, how useful are they? And can they lead to an increase in our knowledge base? Can they lead to a breakthrough in prevention? You know, in safety and health, as we all know, it's like getting to zero, right? Whether we don't want any MSDs, we don't want any particular injury. How do we get to zero? And we're all trying to get there. Even the best safety and health companies often have a hard time getting that line, that asymptote down to zero. So I think these are all new tools that hopefully will get us there in the future.
Was there a comment, Dr. Darabi?
Yes. So I see a lot of questions, and I want to address some of them. So one of the questions is that do we need to develop different courses for different occupational safety problems to address them? I think the answer is like a hybrid yes and no, because there are common principles of AI that apply to all the every single problem that you deal with, they exist, and those principles need to be followed. But when you get to a specific area, like example, we said, construction sites or mining or agriculture, then there are certain dimensions of your AI problems that are very specific. And that's why actually you need OSH experts in that area to be on the team, because there is no way for a computer scientist to understand the problem. That is impossible. And if there is a company that comes to you and say, I'll give you an AI solution by themselves, that cannot happen. That's impossible. In fact, what that company might do is to develop something and then engage you to get your knowledge and then improve what they have developed. Without engaging OSH experts in the process, no way you can get a good product out for specific situations. Yeah. That is proven. Yeah. That will never work. And I think that is going to address the other question, that are we worried about job displacement and people losing? Of course, I don't have any proof, and future will tell us what's going to happen, but I don't think OSH experts would be under any risk for this, because what an OSH expert function is it cannot be automated in that way. Unless the OSH expert is just watching the worker and say, oh, you are not wearing a hat. If that's the function of the OSH expert, that detecting whether a worker is wearing a hat or not, that can be done easily by a machine vision, system, which, AI of images. But if we are trying to develop the situations that, under what circumstances hats should be there, and in what cases, what kind of operator, looking at all those kind of knowledge, then without AI experts, you cannot actually build the system. I would say this, and I had actually a presentation for physicians maybe 2 years ago, and they asked me, are we losing our jobs? Can we put AI there, and an AI diagnoses and treats people? And my answer is then and now is the same thing. No, I don't think physicians or OSH experts would lose their jobs, but the doctors and OSH experts that will not know AI and they don't know what role AI will play in their systems, they might actually have job issues in the future. But the doctors that know how AI can help them and the OSH experts who know AI can help them, their jobs are growing actually. They will not be any problem, because AI will be there whether we want it or not. We cannot escape from that. So we should learn how to coexist with AI. So the sooner we learn that, and there is no way AI can remove these kind of professional jobs like physicians or occupational safety and health experts. Those will stay there. They just need to coexist with AI in the future.
Yeah, well, I hope you're right about that. Recently, one of the AI platforms got an 80% passing grade on the radiology board exam. We'll see. But I want to tie this into the question, since we have the questions here about occupational displacement. I'm wondering what some of our other speakers think about this particular issue, because it certainly is very much front of mind. And it wouldn't be the first time that a technology has led to job displacement, right? Probably going back to the invention of the wheel.
Yeah, well, you can go back, maybe not that far, but Aristotle talked about technology displacing the jobs, and every time the Luddites talked about the same thing, and every time we have a recession or a depression, even in 2008, people talked about that, and you have economists on the one side that talk about technological job displacement being a serious issue. Others think you're going to have this sort of yin and yang between job creation and job destruction. Oftentimes, job creation lags behind the job destruction part. But I think what Dr. Darabi was talking about in the case of an occupational safety and health professional, and the use of AI systems and devices, algorithms, et cetera, is the difference, as the economists say, between being a substitute. In other words, the device, the apparatus, the system, the algorithm entirely substitutes for a job. And clearly that means that that job isn't there anymore for a human worker. Or is it a complement? Are all these things going to be complements to an occupational safety and health professional? And I think I come out on the side of being a complement. It's the same thing that we all went through with our computers. Well, before we had laptop computers and desktop computers, you know, the question is, are these things going to replace us? Well, no, they actually complement us. They increase our ability to do a lot of work, and they create all sorts of jobs. We have IT professionals in all of our places of work to help us with that. So, you know, I'm sort of on the side of job creation, more of a complement for these, and that's why I think we need to learn how to use them. Where I would differ a bit in what Dr. Darabi said is that I think a safety and health professional that does not educate themselves about AI ethics, AI practices, and AI utility and applications in the workplace, they're going to find themselves out of a job, because that employer is going to find somebody else who knows all of that and just replace them altogether. Because it's going to be so integral, as Dr. Darabi says, it's going to be so integral into the practice of safety and health as it's becoming in all other aspects of professions, that unless you know this area, there really is not a future for you.
Dr. Handel, your response to that, I'm wondering, do you think there is a fundamental core competency that we're all going to need to have to keep our jobs?
I guess I wouldn't put it that way, but I would agree that you know, transparency and understanding the technology is important. I think I was just thinking about, like, you know, the trustworthy driving car that we were talking about earlier, right? Like, you know, I would never want a car to drive me, but we rely on things all the time that use AI that we deem trustworthy. I mean, air traffic control is a great example. We get in airplanes all the time that fly us all over the place. There's lots of different kinds of, you know, AI technologies that are used to help support air traffic control and the operation of airplanes. So it's more about, like, you know, just understanding that it's kind of built into very many things that we're already doing in one way or another. And it may not be the latest, you know, LLM types of AI that have really, like, been all the buzz, but there are many, many kinds of AI that are already in our workplaces, in our environments, in our day-to-day. I think one of the things that I think is really exciting from the clinical perspective is just that it really will increase capacity, similar to the earlier discussion about, you know, IT professionals and computers really increasing our capacity. And, you know, like the clinical trial matching example I gave earlier, right now, busy clinicians don't have time to go through the hundreds and hundreds of trials that a patient might be able to be enrolled in. But if an AI assistant can help them narrow it down to just, you know, 1 or 3, they do have the time and will take the time. And then, you know, we've really, like, helped the patient, we've helped the clinician, everybody goes home happy, right? And so I think those are the kinds of stories that we really want to promote. Now, that's not to say that, you know, I see there's somebody in the chat talking about, you know, tell that to the elevator operators, right? So if, you know, when we have those very large, many-storied buildings in New York City that, you know, AI is, you know, telling which elevator to go to which floor so it can use the least amount of, you know, effort or you know, time and, you know, money to move people around from the floor to floor. Well, okay, yeah, it actually has replaced the elevator operator in those contexts, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other roles that are then created as a consequence of that. So we have more people who have to run the actual like machinery of the elevator, that have to run the IT software of the elevator, that have to help direct people on different floors to help get where they want to go, because the elevator is not doing that anymore, right? And so I feel like it's much more of an augmentation of existing roles and responsibilities, but also the creation of new ones that really come about by reducing the burden that we have in some of these areas.
I appreciate your thoughts on that. As you were speaking, I was thinking, and there's a book which has fascinated me since it came out in 2018. David Graeber was, he's now deceased anthropologist who, and I hope I'm not offending anybody, but the title of his book published by Simon Schuster was called Bullshit Jobs, A Theory. And what in that book, what he basically postulated was that there are many meaningful jobs, and that produce societal harm. And in fact, he estimates that over half of societal work is pointless and becomes psychologically destructive if you associate your work with self-worth. So if half of the jobs that we're doing today, and I don't know if Graeber was right or wrong on this, but if there are a lot of jobs out there where we are like the elevator operator, we're right now just pressing a button, which nobody needs to press that button anymore. If those jobs all went away and we created new jobs that track with the emergence of AI, ethically, isn't that where we need to move? And I don't know if you've seen this book. If you haven't, I really recommend it, because it's really intriguing, because people volunteer their stories of how they've created whole layers of work for other people around them, all of which was actually meaningless. And I think we all have examples of that. Those of us who are in academia know this very well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head here. I mean, I think that's, what we call societal progress, right? Like we're maturing as a species by, developing new technologies. I mean, we went from, gathering to hunting when we first started building tools, right? I mean, that increased our diet, our range, I just feel like it's not really any different at some level. But I think the point is that we, in today's world, need to plan for it. It's not about, yes, there will be some jobs that are no longer needed as much, because we have technologies that can do them for us. But if we plan well for that, and we also develop those technologies to actually be the useful tools that we all want them to be, and safe, then that gives us opportunities to grow as for humanity to grow in new ways. And to your point, I don't think of them as any jobs as being useless. It's more of a step in the progression, of humanity.
There's a question. There are a couple of very practical questions that some folks are asking, and I love some of the inspired thoughts that are coming through in the Q&A. And one of them is one I want to pitch to you, Dr. Howard. There was a question: is there an opportunity for employers using AI via robotics to optimize an aging workforce resource?
Interesting question. To the extent that a robotic device can alleviate some of the physical strain associated with jobs that are largely physical, the answer would probably be yes. The example that I can think of is the increase in the use of exoskeletons or exosuits to prevent physical strain that may lead to musculoskeletal disorder. And whether they be shoulder assist devices or back assist devices or leg assist devices, we're seeing more and more of these being manufactured and being touted by manufacturers as the way to prevent musculoskeletal disorders. And to the extent that the workforce is aging, then or at any age, you certainly don't want to create MSDs, because that can be career ending over time, as cumulative trauma tends to be. So yeah, I could see these technologies. Some of these are just passive devices. They're not really active devices that have no AI component to them. But yeah, the answer is still fairly unknown. The largest prospective study was done by Virginia Tech in conjunction with the Ford Motor Company in 18 of their plants over a significant period of time. A case control study, and it showed not that MSDs were prevented, but there was a suggestion of decrease in symptoms associated, reported by workers. So the answer is still not in yet whether these devices actually do prevent MSDs, but those types of devices, robotic devices, these technologies certainly could achieve a significant gain for an older worker, a senior worker, a worker that may have previous injury. And so we have to wait and see how valuable these devices are for us in the future work.
Another very practical question that was I want to pose to people, because others may be thinking this one too. AI can be used to create outlines, or others are using it to start their publications. What's the best way to cite AI in, I think it's applying to things that you might write or research that you might want to publish? And there was a question, what are others doing in this area?
So I can maybe take the first crack at that one. It is a hard question, and I think a lot of folks are grappling with it in various kinds of ways. Similar to like plagiarism detection tools to help, educators understand when somebody has plagiarized something. I think there's a recognition that everybody's using these resources now. It's really pretty much, you don't meet anyone on the street who hasn't tried them out. There are a variety of recommendations that are available. I can try to dig a few up and put them in the chat to help reference. And so at a very minimum, just say which tool did you use and which date did you access it. But some of the resources now will actually let you know where the information actually comes from. So if you actually do have a result that you want to cite, you can suggest in your citation not only which resource you used and what the date it was accessed, but also the result that's given back to you will tell you the provenance of that information. Now, I have noticed that sometimes those are wrong. So that's something to really look out for, but that's an even better layer to include, is if you can actually include the information that these LLM tools, these large language model tools give you, is where did they get the information from, as well as the sort of general information.
Dr. Harrod, what are you telling your teams at NIOSH about the use of AI in their reports and publications?
I'm not sure that we have the answer to that yet. I think we're like everybody else, as Melissa's pointing out. I think that the actual source, beyond just looking up something on Google or ChatGPT, you have to find what the source of that particular piece of information or fact is. And the I don't know, the zeitgeist for what is an acceptable reference, it has changed. I remember a paper that I wrote maybe 10 years ago, and I had a citation to Wikipedia, and oh my God, the editors immediately threw that out, said, "Oh no, you have to have another site. You can't use that." So I went back and did some more research and found another source. But so now I see Wikipedia being used, quite. So I don't know, maybe ChatGPT 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 will do that. But when I've used ChatGPT to do any kind of research, I don't get what I like to do with I read anything is to figure out, where does that site come from? Where does that piece of information, what's the original source of that? And these large language models, they don't do that. It's not really a scholarly approach to information. So I find them, not very useful. I entered one time, I was looking at the image one on ChatGPT, and I entered salmon fishing or salmon swimming upstream or something like that. And I got like salmon fillets, like you buy in the grocery store in some kind of water. And I had to then, change the prompt to salmon fish swimming upstream. And then I got actual fish and stuff, which reminds me about job creation, back to that job displacement issue. There's now in BLS, I was talking to somebody at BLS, they're redoing their jobs of the future kind of thing. And, data wrangler was the one they came up with a couple of years ago that I thought was kind of interesting. Well, they're thinking about putting prompt engineer into their new occupational titles, which evidently is some kind of new job where you can consult a prompt engineer to get your prompts so accurate that it'll increase the accuracy of the output from the ChatGPT algorithm. So who knows?
Yeah. Well, I think on that one, it ties into one of the questions in the chat. I'm going to segue to it, which is that, maybe we need prompt engineers, because maybe one of the things that they can help us do is to ask the questions of AI in a way that we might be able to cut through the biases. And one of the concerns, which is in this question, and that others have, is how do we avoid compounding bias in the results that we get back when we have prompts to AI? Isn't there a risk? And we said this very early. I forget which one of you said it, but it's about the input. And if we've been heavily studying one particular health condition or one particular exposure, won't we continue to compound the biases?
Yeah, I mean, it's garbage in, garbage out. I mean, no matter how you look at it, how fancy these algorithms get, it's what goes in there. The training data set is extremely important, which is another example of transparency and accountability. Is, okay, so OpenAI used the entire internet. Well, we know there's all sorts of things on the internet that are not exactly kosher. So the issue is, can I examine that training data set in any detail? That goes to the issue of accountability and transparency. Again, a fundamental ethical value associated with AI. How can I figure that out? What's my practice in terms of trying to figure that out? And again, it goes back to how can I ensure that I have a valid, reliable, trustworthy output here.
I really think we're going to have a challenge around managing harmful bias, and that it exists today, and I think we're just going to see more of that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think
if we trust the AI output.
Yeah, no, I think that's really why NIST put it as its seventh value, is fair with harmful bias managed. And that's really, sort of a systemic kind of thing, depending on the training data set. It also can be sort of computational, statistical kind of framework there, where the data set and the processes that the algorithm uses. And then there's sort of that I don't know, cognitive thing where it's filling in missing information. The algorithm may allow it to fill in some missing information. All it's doing is doing next word prediction. I mean, you take all the window dressing away. That's all it's doing. And everybody at OpenAI doesn't know exactly how it's doing that. So the question is, if you really don't know how it's doing the job, then what kind of accountability can you really have from such a system? And that's why I keep emphasizing this incremental deployment of these systems within the workplace. you know, having a student look at writing an essay for some class or something is totally different than introducing that system into a workplace where human beings are at risk of injury or death. I think it's an entirely different thing.
Well, this has been a great discussion. You know what I would like to do at this point? We just have a few minutes left. What I'd like to give each of you is each take, if you will, maybe 2 minutes for your closing remarks. If there's a take-home message that you really want to leave us with today, maybe it's something that came out of today's discussion, or it's another point that you don't want us to miss. I'd like to take a turn with each of you to give you a couple of minutes to share some parting thoughts. And Dr. Darabi, if I may, and I know I sprung this on the three of you, I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but Dr. Darabi, if I could turn to you for your closing thoughts that you want to pass along.
Yeah, sure. So I think this was a great discussion, and we all know there's a lot of issues with AI currently and in the future. I would suggest, we can be kind of just a member of the public who hear these news every day and they make some assumptions or try to understand how AI works. And I would strongly encourage at least occupational safety, health, and professionals to go beyond the materials that they're acquiring from the public kind of resources and try to understand what roles they can play in this area. This is, again, not in the public domain. And I think with that, a lot of issues can be addressed when OSH experts become a part of the AI system and they understand it, versus just, again, general thinking about the idea. So that's what I think, would be an effective solution, at least for now, until the future.
All right, we're gonna take the wheel of that automation. Thank you. Dr. Hendel.
So I think it's just been a wonderful discussion. We've really explored some pretty large swaths of society. I guess my real sort of insight in terms of occupational usages is that, it really comes back to this idea that we really need the socio-technical collaboration in order to build things that are really fit for purpose, and that they're actually meeting the goals that we have. And that I think, when we think about, workers, being concerned about being displaced or being selected with non-transparent, kinds of methods and these kinds of things, that this can really be alleviated by creating a much greater, conversation and partnership around how we build these things. We, in our clinical communities, have spent quite a lot of time working with clinicians to say, if you had the dream AI bot, what would it do for you? And just simply sitting down and taking the time to ask those questions, like, what are the workers concerned about safety? Are those specific safety issues amenable to an AI technology? How could we work together to make sure that those AI technologies are actually going to address that particular safety concern? And how would the workers know that it was working if it was implemented? And I think that's, that human piece that we've been kind of alluding to throughout the conversation today really just has to be part of the future of AI in occupational science.
And thank you for bringing this back to the worker level. I really appreciate that comment. Dr. Howard, parting shot.
Final shot. Beware. Ethics can be exploited as if it were a real alternative to legislation, policy, and law. What was so shocking about the OpenAI president coming to the Congress asking for regulation, because a lot of companies, a lot of things that you may buy in this area for the workplace, they exploit the fact that there's such a thing as our guideline, our ethical guideline, and we don't need legislation. We don't need to worry about it. I think you need to be beware of that. Now, if you're European, you're a little more aware of that, and they're starting to do more regulation and more law. In the US, the Congress is still trying to understand what AI is, but beware of people promising you that, well, we have really strong ethics, we don't need any legislation.
Wow, thank you for that. I think the the future of policy in this area is going to be fascinating to be part of. And I really appreciate that cautionary message. With that, I'm going to turn this back over to you, Madison. I want to close by thanking our participants today. What a fabulous discussion. And also for all of you, the hundreds of you who have been joining us today and adding your questions. I think you'll agree that this was certainly a mind-expanding hour and a half that we spent together. So thank you again to our participants. I know you didn't know what you were getting into when you signed up for this, but boy, it sure was enriching. Madison, I want to turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Newman, and wonderful job moderating today and being a part of this discussion and engaging our participants. Thank you to the three of you as well for joining us as panelists. Just a few closing remarks. As you exit this webinar, you should see a survey, which will give us some feedback about our webinar today and be able to allow you to claim those continuing education credits for those of you who are interested in doing that. And we would also like to invite you, if you liked this series today, we'd like to invite you to join us for our next webinar in this series, which will be held on October 11th, same time. But in this next webinar, we will be exploring the ethics behind the new emerging child labor laws. So if you liked this discussion, please join us again for the next webinar in this series. But with that, thank you all again for joining us, and we hope to see you in October. Thank you to all of our panelists.
Thank you, everyone. Be well, be safe.
Thanks, everyone.